I'm really excited. This is our third webinar in the series of COVID-19 specific insights. So what we're going to be doing today is focusing on Generation Z and how they're defining health and wellness. And what this means is we did some research. I'm going to talk about this a little bit in just a few slides, but we had done some research last year starting to explore what health and wellness meant for Generation Z. And then we also, now we've been studying COVID-19, have a really great understanding of how that's impacting Gen Z as it relates to their health and wellness. So what we've done is we've done a gap analysis, and we have some exciting insights that we're going to be sharing out with you today. What we're going to be doing is first walking through what we discovered last year before COVID-19, before this huge disruption in the world. And we're going to talk about how they defined health and wellness and what those frames and metaphors and emotions were before COVID-19. And then what we're going to do is look at how this generation is being impacted by COVID-19 and revisit some of our old data for some of the audience members who have been with us on this journey. And then we have some speculations for the future as well of how is COVID-19 going to change the frames and the emotions and even the behaviors and brand relationships that Generation Z is going to have now. And I wanted to start with this really brilliant quote from Brian Stanford, who's a doctor out of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And he said, health is a state of body and wellness is a state of being. And this quote is perfect for how Generation Z is thinking and framing up health and wellness. Because what we discovered is it's really not about this external factor of health and wellness that's very traditional that we have seen in every other cohort. Generation Z is remaking and redefining what health and wellness means. So, like I said, we started this work about 9 or 10 months ago, and we started seeing health and wellness everywhere. There are a lot of trends as well. And then I'm going to start sharing out. We're going to be co-presenting with some partners in here that I'm going to introduce in just a second, because they saw this in a lot of the things we're going to be exploring here. They saw these trends in the marketplace starting to take root before they almost were in the marketplace. So what we saw is health and wellness everywhere. And we at Olsons Altman really wanted to understand, who is Generation Z? Why is health and wellness everywhere? Why are all these things trending? Why were we hearing the words self-care in the podcasts we were listening to, in the research we were doing across all industries and categories? And why were we reading about self-care, health, and wellness in every single publication? And so we knew that it was everywhere, but what we didn't feel confident about here at Olsons Altman was, what did it mean? How did Generation Z start to define this? And we knew that this mattered because Generation Z, right, they're the most up-and-coming generation. And we wanted to understand how they're defining it, like I said, because we know that they're going to take over the market soon. And when we were doing some research as well, health and wellness is a driving factor. It's been in so much of our work for probably the last 15 years. We started hearing about how people are balancing their health and wellness, which is also interesting because the deep metaphor of balance is not so prominent for Generation Z as well. And then once we started leading this COVID-19 and how these cohorts are unconsciously thinking about COVID-19 and its impact to their life, we started seeing what's developing is many tensions and a lot of internal turmoil that's happening with Gen Z. And we wanted to continue to shed some light on this, and we thought a gap analysis would have been Incredibly important. I do have the chat window open, so if anyone has any questions or any would like to brainstorm, please feel free to share out some chats because we'll have time at the end of this webinar to address those. And I also will be sending out this full report afterwards, which in the report there's going to be rich videos that you can view from Gen Z when they were going through the research as well. So on our next slide, as I was talking about some of our partners in this piece of research, most of you who are on know us. This is Olson Zaltman. We were founded at Harvard, and we really specialize in eliciting metaphors because through metaphors, we can discover and uncover the authentic voice of the customer, of consumers, of people, and really start to understand their whole entire minds. And we're joined today by our partners at Axis Mundi. And what they do is they look at cultural discourse, semiotics, and design theory, and they apply that in all industries as well. So we have the founding partners on the phone here today, and on this webinar, we have Rosie and Karouche on, and they're going to be sharing some of the semiotics and territories that brands are going to be tapping into, and almost speculations that they see that for the future as well, that they as it relates to health and wellness. I'm really excited that they can join us. And then our partnerships as well would derive one in our tool of simile as we move forward. So the process of this data, and if anyone has any methodology questions, please reach out. But what we did last year is we did a small mobile ethnography study, and then we also did a small ZMET study. We're also going to be looking back at our simile data in just a few slides as well. But for those of you who are new, and haven't joined, where all of these methodologies and what marries them all is metaphor. Metaphors are how people understand the world, and it generates up to 95% of all of our thoughts and decisions, and they make communication easier as well. Generation Z, I can say, and what we're discovering is they are really struggling now with COVID-19, and metaphors and emotions and tapping into their intuitive frames are more important now than ever. So let's jump in and first talk about Generation Z, because they are a generation that we are just starting to discover and learn about and do more and more research on. I do want to, there's two important things to note here, because we're going to keep seeing these verbatims and these trends show up in our research. But what we read is that Gen Z is one of the first generations as a cohort today that are really fluent in the rapid information gathering. This is going to be incredibly relevant in the verbatims we're going to be sharing with you and the things that they shared with us. And what Generation Z is adept at doing is sifting through a lot of messages, even institutional messages, and they can filter out the noise and identify voices that they can trust. And right now they're calling on brands to be increasingly transparent and accountable. So when we think about their needs when it comes to health and wellness, and we even think about claims, ingredients, communication principles, transparency and accountability is one that's so important for them. They're also catalyzing movements with their peers, and they're all around awareness. They appreciate awareness, utility, and simplicity. And as we move on, I want to start now sharing verbatims with you as it relates to what health and wellness means to them. So as you can take a look here, and this was really surprising to us as we start thinking about how they are defining this. One person said that it's important in your life to have a solid state of mental wellness. Another person had shared with us that it's that if you're in the right mental state in your life, you have a healthier life. Here, as you can see, another individual from Generation Z says, I focus on social wellness, having someone there to support you, right? These are keys in your life. We automatically started seeing a big change, and we have a model that we developed for everyone on the call joining us today. Is that because there's a big shift from your external sense of health and wellness to your internal. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. We also discovered in our mobile ethnography and ZMET interviews a year ago that intuitively Generation Z has a lot of paradoxes inherent in them. Not surprisingly, there's a lot of tensions that exist in their life. So they are incredibly connected across multiple devices, right? Multitasking all the time, even more adept at it than millennials. But yet they're increasingly lonely. We heard a lot of loneliness in our data. It's also something we're going to talk about in just a few minutes as it relates to how COVID is impacting their lives. And they're really, right now, they're going from places of complexity to places of comfort. They're also hopeful, yet they're realistic, right? They're grounded in reality. They're indulging themselves as well, yet they're continually stressed. And our hypothesis here is, and we expect to continue to see this in research, is, and you're going to see this as well in the data that we share out, is that these tensions are driving a deep reflective and introspection in Generation Z, and also a deep need for positivity. So if we just look at these verbatims, and again, I recommend when we share out the final report, that our audience watch the videos as well to really get a sense of Generation Z. But one person in a video had shared with us that he doesn't engage with negative energy at all. He said, I focus on myself and what I want. Another person said, loving yourself is the hardest thing to do. And then finally, one other person said, that they just want to surround themselves with others who support and encourage them. So you can see there's this huge need for positivity to envelop Generation Z's life, more so than other generations as well. So this is the model that I brought up a few minutes ago. For generation, we see a tremendous shift in the motivations in their lives as it relates to health and wellness. Before, and for previous cohorts and generations that we've spoken to, we saw external motivations happening where society is influencing their decisions. They were concerned with replicating what society was going to tell them what to do, how they should act, even how they should look, right? What physical wellness standards should they adhere and conform to? With Generation Z, they've turned this on their head and they've shifted it. And now what we've discovered in our research is all around internal motivations, where they're making decisions based purely on what is best for them. I do want to make note that they feel society's pressures to conform, but what they're prioritizing is their sense of self. And their sense of self is both the mental self and the physical self. So what they do is they're engaging in behaviors that is curating almost the health and wellness experience to them that's going to connect them to their internal goals, that's going to help them feel in control. In just a few slides, we're going to talk about their deep metaphors as well. But it's not really, as I said, it's not a deep metaphor of balance that they're trying to shift these, trying to balance these internal and external motivations. What we see in our data is an evidence of a whole mindset and frame shift for them. And what this means is this whole shift in their systems right now is really challenging all the past, more traditional frames of health and wellness within Generation Z. So all these old systems of having to look a certain way or feel like you have to fit into a certain mold or buy certain things, or even look for certain words on packaging that cue health and wellness. This is no longer relevant for Generation Z. Gen Z frames this up incredibly differently. And for them, they inherently do not believe they should lose or give up anything to be healthy and well. And again, that's the balance, right? They don't feel like health and wellness is a balance. There's no juggling act. There's no tightrope walking here for them. So they see this, right? there as this new system of holistic wellness. And it's incredibly transparent for them, both in their consumption and their behaviors. And what this does is we're finding is this is enables in greater fluidity. It celebrates their individual uniqueness as well, because Generation Z does not want to feel pressured, right? They see that balance, that system of loss to imbalance, to changing your behaviors, to gaining something. That is a pressure to them, right? That they do not want to partake in it, and they don't believe that they have to. Ultimately for them, and we're going to see some of these verbatims in just a few slides, is it's about what feels good to them. And health and wellness for them is not necessarily jumping on a spin bike. It can be about cleaning, baking, listening to music, meditating, or even reading is how they're defining health and wellness right now. It's more nuanced and it's a lot more individualized. And I think it creates a huge opportunity for brands and marketers today to communicate with them, be relevant for them, and then also give them important things and really extend brand meaning today. So here's another important verbatim. One person had said, that right now it's how you decide how you react to situations, right? You can't decide what's happening to you in the world and around you, but that you can have a different outlook on life. And that's healthy, right? So it's a completely different mindset around health and wellness. So the two most prominent deep metaphors for Generation Z, and for those of you who have been with us on past calls, know that deep metaphors are something that guide our insights and guide our analyses and our process. And deep metaphors are the frames in which we think about and view the world. They're tools, right, that we can use to deeply connect with people with, and we use these to connect with brands, right, and establish ourselves with brands. And they can really influence our thoughts and our feelings and even our behaviors as well. So for Generation Z, their biggest mental frames and deep metaphors are control and connection. Today we're going to talk about control, but we're going to spend the majority of our time talking about connection as well before we compare how COVID is changing these two frames. Okay, so how Generation Z is gaining control they need is through the internal motivators and through this shift that's been happening. So they have these needs and desires that are all driven by what they need internally. They don't, as I said earlier, they're not allowing society to drive their behaviors or drive their desires. Gen Z, at its heart, feels more in control of their lives. And what they believe is the more control and autonomy, not surprisingly, that they have over their lives, the more it's going to increase the quality of their lives. So as we see in this verbatim, it's even really interesting, right? They talk a lot about mental health and wellness and how they have to heal that as well. And then this verbatim is so interesting because you can see this person said looking inward, right, is really important to find out what's going to make you feel better and ultimately getting, to that place where you're healing your mind. It's almost shocking to me sometimes that some of the people we talk to are 18 years old, right? And they have this almost collective wisdom as a generation. And as we go on, when we think about when we were unpacking what control means for them, this is where they really feel at their peak of being physically and mentally well. They feel right now that if they can get to a place of control, and here you can see they talk about it as even more sleep as something that is within how they define better health and wellness, right? That if they're getting, more sleep, they feel more in control. And then they say you're the master of your own destiny, right? That you have more clarity in your thought. And I know that this is what was really interesting when we were working with Access Money, when Karush and Rosie talked in just a few minutes about what they found. They did their cultural analysis at the same time we were doing our interviews, and they found this starting to creep up in sort of almost like the collective unconsciousness of people and be a territory as well for brands. So control is so important. And here you can see it's all about if they feel that they have the control that for their health and wellness, that they're going to have achievement, empowerment, positivity, success, even reaching your greatest potential here as well. And again, this is all happening younger and younger in their lives. Okay, I'm going to let Rosie and Krush talk about this emerging control territory.
Thanks, Jessica, for inviting us onto this webinar and having us participate with you. So, as Jessica's mentioned, Rosie and myself, we run a semiotics studio based in the UK. For those of you who might not have worked with semiotics before, it's a research methodology that studies how meaning is structured and communicated in signs and symbols that are found in popular culture, whether they be visual, verbal, or sensory. So we spend much of our time studying and organizing material found in popular media, online, in magazines, cinema, TV, and tracking those trends over time to see where cultural trajectories are taking consumer attitudes and behaviors. So in parallel to Olsen-Zoltman's study on Gen Z and wellness, we looked into the wider culture to see whereabouts we can identify emerging nascent signals of wellness for this emerging generation. And obviously, COVID-19 has accelerated the urgency with which we need to look into Gen Z as they're thrust into quite a prominent role. So happily, a lot of the material we found chimed with what Jessica's been talking about in relation to control. So the determination, the inner determination we see among Gen Z is reflected in the popular emergence of cognitive enhancement strategies, whether they be nootropics, medicines, or even things like functional coffees that help mind and body stay alert. We're also seeing how the body is increasingly instrumentalized as an economic asset for Gen Z. So this typology of the sculpted body that we see in a TV show such as Love Island, that's very popular in the UK, kind of demonstrates the increasing demands on the human body for Gen Z, and how the body is used by them online, particularly as instruments of economic advantage. And overall, we just see this surge towards extracting marginal gains in every facet of wellness for Gen Z. Whether that's adaptogens or alkaline in your drinks, they're looking for strategies to stay focused and prepared. And I think particularly in the context of something like COVID-19, it kind of validates their desire to have an edge in a context of perhaps hostility or anxiety about where their life paths might take them. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Perfect. So we're going to also look at connection next, and what does Gen Z need as it relates to connection, because there's a lot of paradoxes as it relates to Generation Z here as well. So what we found is that once Generation Z has the control of their lives and specifically of their health and wellness, and again, they're defining that health and wellness as primarily mental health and wellness. Even if it's physical, it's being filtered through the mental state. And once they have that sense of control, they begin to seek connections with others and even with brands as well. But what we find is that there's a lot of isolated socializing within Generation Z, because they have a constant access, right, to people, followers on social media platforms, but they're engaging and connecting with these and increasingly isolated socializing behaviors. Now, when we look at our COVID-19 findings, which we're going to get to in just a bit, that does have problems and repercussions for this generation as well, because we're seeing a lot of mental health problems coming out of Gen Z and a lot of tensions that exist for them because of this isolated socializing now. Because we found that this in our data was almost a problem 10 months ago. And now that they're actually physically isolated, it's creating almost havoc in Generation Z's lives. Because even though they're online, there's even 10 months ago, they were incredibly lonely. And it was very challenging for Gen Z to start filtering what's a real connection versus what's a genuine, true connection, and then seeing which ones are meaningful and almost unselfish. And then now that they're living more of their lives digitally, like I said, that's very tenuous for them. And they're also seeking connection beyond their contemporary lives. And they're motivated right now by the effects of the fragmentation that's happening societally, and they're uncertain about their future. And you can see here these tensions that are existing, of course, are still relevant and amplified for Gen Z, because now in our COVID data, we're also seeing unconscious tensions and unconscious worries and anxieties about their futures as well, and how they're even framing COVID-19. And they're really looking for hope and something to believe in, because right now they feel restricted by or even then, 10 months ago, they felt restricted by their lives, by the contemporary way they were living their lives. And we are going to hypothesize now, when we did our gap analysis, that this is now even they're feeling this even more. We wanted to share some verbatims as well, really quickly, because they are the most connected and the loneliest of generations. So here, Ashley said to us that she felt like it's important to have human connections in order to be healthy, right? And then, and how you can compare and contrast someone else's viewpoints with your own. And Jordan here on the right-hand side, right, had talked about that, it's a good way of, you have to support people, not just on social media, right? That you have to be reminded that people are actually really there, not just digitally there, who care about you, because it makes you feel less alone. But then when we look at Allie, this is a picture, right, that he had brought in, and of this picture of this colorful brain. And he had said that there are many different colors in the brain, and that all represents stress, anxiety that are going on in his head. Ultimately, he said, I feel alone. I isolate myself, right? And he was like, I feel like I could convey myself better without having to worry about other people's feelings as well. So there's a lot of mindfulness around what do others think about you? How are they going to be there for you? And then how are you going to be there for yourself and connect with people as well? There's so many tensions with Generation Z. And so they have this deep need for real, true, authentic connections. And marketers right now can strengthen, and we believe that there's an opportunity for them to strengthen their bonds with Generation Z through connecting with them in a more meaningful way, in ways that are non-traditional, that brands have not connected with them before in the past. How to do this, we have some thought starters here as well, is the need to stay genuine. As you saw in some previous slides, is they can really understand what inauthentic connections feel like. They live those digitally frequently. And so they really are seeking genuine connections, right? They believe that this is a necessity for wellness right now. And because of this, it helps them, as we said, thrive and achieve their goals, right? Personally and professionally. Gen Z also, they're looking for opportunities to be vulnerable. In just a few slides, we're going to be looking at the impact of COVID-19 for this cohort. This is more important now than ever, because they're putting on a brave face and a very stoic facade to the outside world. And they really, what we discovered 10 months ago, is they need to be more vulnerable. And now we're seeing that in COVID-19 again, that need is amplified, and we're going to share some of how the imagery that they chose to symbolize the impact of COVID-19 on their lives. And even 10 months ago, when they were thinking about their health and wellness, is they're looking for a sense of community where they can practice traditions, right? And connect to communities around health and wellness, to feel hopeful, to feel involved and connected with others. And finally, how can brands really uniquely and dynamically create brand bridges that are going to give this generation a voice where they feel like they will be heard? So it's if they can connect to themselves in a genuine way, connect with others as well, and then finally connect with brands. These are three important facets for Generation Z. And importantly, when we focus on connection as well, we wanted to give some guardrails, because connection, it's very much for them what we called reflective and intuitive connections. Gen Z is using technology and their intuition, their gut. That's system one, right? Whole mind approach. They're using that to filter out what they deem as that bad energy, that, that those things that aren't positive in their lives as it relates to their health and wellness. And they're starting to safeguard the good. Here, you can see here that someone says, it's a beautiful feeling, right? Even connecting to nature again. And it's almost alarming when you look at these verbatims, and we're so flooded today with having a lens of COVID-19 that even it feels like these are relevant even today, where this is almost 10 months old data of needing to connect to nature again. But here, what they said, it's taking the time for yourself and reconnecting, and that's what health is. And that's why we think this data is so important, because if we were seeing these trends 10 months ago, like I said, these are going to be even more potent and prominent now with the global pandemic that we're all faced with. What connection is not, right? It's not artificial. It's not ingenuine connections, as well, as you can see here. It's not them looking, you can see here, of looking for others to view them in a certain way, or even how they can be dictated to feel or think about something, right? And for them, it's the connection is really about how it's a baseline necessity for them for their wellness. All right. So as we move on, I'm going to let Kurush take us over and talk about some emerging territories as it relates to connecting to this generation.
Thanks, Jess. So I always think, in the context of connectivity and Gen Z, it's interesting to make comparisons to the previous millennial generation. So whereas millennials might just about remember the sound of the dial-up tone, they kind of lived through the digital revolution from pre-social media to the maturing social media age. I think we can consider Gen Z as the first post-digital generation brought up online, and as a consequence, perhaps they do not ponder so much the meaning of connectivity, so much as directly seek authentic connectivity outside, beyond the digital realm. And in the context of COVID-19 and all these other global political and kind of social challenges, the urgency to make those connections is ever greater. So someone like Greta Thunberg and the context of climate justice is one particular zone where making meaningful strides towards change it's not held back by any sense of digital connectivity. And indeed, in terms of seeking meaningful connections, we see Gen Z actually curiously looking towards religious belief, whether they be old or new religious beliefs. So there was an article in the New York Times a few days ago that kind of looked at the emerging interest among highly educated, connected Gen Z people for Catholicism, and a particular kind of traditional catechism of Catholicism. We also see, for instance, the Snapchat campaign from late last year, which looked at friendship and real friends, as opposed to perhaps the fake friends that millennials have on Facebook and Instagram. Back to you, Jess.
Wonderful. Awesome. So what we also did is worked with Access Monday then to find some examples, right, that are out there in the marketplace that are really starting to meet Generation Z where they are intuitively right now and have been for, for some of these brands for a while now. So when we think about industry examples that are alive in food and beverage today, is one person had said, right, I'm very passionate about helping the underserved and thinking about and working with vulnerable and underserved populations. And we see for within food and beverage these two opportunities. The first one all around giving back. And there's Rebel, the brand where it's a plant-based company where they craft these like herbal elixirs and they donate it to help end the fight against human trafficking. So this is one brand that's alive today in the market, sort of in this emerging space. And then also one that has been around and has, gaining so much popularity is Oatly oat milk, right? Vegan options. I love this verbatim from one of our Gen Zers, and he had said, I follow a bunch of health and wellness YouTubers and follow someone called John Venus, who's a vegan bodybuilder, right? And even that, is breaking traditional norms around what health and wellness means as well. As somebody, who's super fit, but does it by eating a vegan diet that you can still be strong and not eat animals as well. And Oatly is known for their dairy-free oat milk and they say it's in tune with both the needs of humans and the planet. And then when we also look here as well at what's happening in CPG and some other industry examples that are meeting Gen Z here, is there's one person had shared with us that, and we saw this verbatims like this many, many times over and over, that they want to know what to expect. I'm sure for everyone on the call, you hear this in research again and again, is they want to know what things are made of. Can they feel safe with it? Is it made of toxic ingredients, right? And then they can feel a lot less anxious and feel more in control. Again, that deep metaphor, that deeper need of in control. And here there's Bloom, fem care products for women. These are sexual intimate care products that tout transparency in their entire branded communications as well. And we also heard from Gen Z, as Kurush had mentioned, social change is so important to them, right? And even at a personal level and environmental level, and what the inclusivity that we see is Fenty is doing this incredibly well. I know that they are posting incredible success right now, and they celebrate beauty that comes in all shades, right? And then finally, when we look at tech and entertainment, it's so interesting because our work with Access Monday 10 months ago, they found this interesting emerging area around air and water purity. We saw that in our data 10 months ago now too. And one of our Gen Zers had shared with us that he had just gotten an air purifier for his apartment and was saying, there's things in the air we don't even think about, right? And how we're polluting the air with chemicals. And so then what we're seeing is they were talking about technologies that can improve our environment as well. And now we're living in the time of COVID, and this is now, again, we're being amplified when we think about air purity. And then finally, when we think about social mediation, right now, Kurush mentioned TikTok as well, and why TikTok and researchers are believing that this is gaining prominence for Gen Z is that it's where you share content that's unfiltered. I was on a call the other day with a brilliant agency, and the agency had said that TikTokers are actually campaigning, and this whole generation is campaigning for millennials who are the Instagram generation and where it's all about perfection. They're campaigning for millennials to stay off TikTok, to keep TikTok real. right? Because they want content that, here you can see, does not hurt their mental health. So this was all health and wellness last year. And then COVID-19 hit for Generation Z. And if you joined us on our last two webinars, this is a very quick refresher. I'm going to go through this really quickly. Is that Generation Z ultimately felt threatened with a force. They used three distinct conflict frames. They talked about COVID-19 as something that physically is threatening them, physically hurting them. You can see here in these verbatims. They also talked about it as it feels like they're in a war, right? That chaos is going to hit them. They also talked about it as a storm or a natural disaster that's threatening us all, right? That it's like a tornado and the world will be destroyed. So then what does this mean when we do a gap analysis of all of this data that we had? What is this going to do to Generation Z's control and connection deep metaphors as it relates to their health and wellness? And this is some imagery that they chose on our Simile platform as they think about COVID-19. We're going to dig in just a minute. But what's happening to their control is that they're losing their sense of mental health and wellness today. As I mentioned, they have what feels like they should have a carefully polished image that's really masking their intensifying emotional turmoil in their lives. And you can see this in this sort of black and red and blue picture here. And for their connection, as I just shared, there's this already fragile connection that they had in the world with the people around them. And this is just even more strained by their virtual, by their real isolation from the world today with the stay-at-home orders. So these are, we shared these slides out a few weeks ago, but I do want to come back to them because there is now, they have to be distancing, but it's all digital life now. You can see here is they said to us their whole contact with the outside world is on Zoom. They can't be seen by anyone. They almost feel invisible, right? They're saying it's affecting their mental health, right? And that there's less human interaction. And you can see even this image right here in the bottom left or right hand side, excuse me, of this person actually completely disappearing, right? We can't even see them. And they fear this deep disconnection from the connections of their lives and the social milestones that they're supposed to be meeting today. And even though they're trying to alleviate the problem of feeling disconnected, but what's actually happening is all of this contact through digital means is contributing to the total virtualization of their lives and creating more and more tensions and emotional turmoil. What we can do is we found when we bring insights to action is that they need to plug back into the real world to relieve these feelings. Gen Z places a lot of value now on the tangible, direct interactions and communications with people, right? Especially today where screens are keeping people apart. So we have these in the report if anyone wants to amplify connection messaging in their communications. And COVID-19 is actually taking more and more control away from them. So it's hurting their health and wellness and how they define health and wellness today. They describe themselves right now as attempting to maintain, like I said, these brave facades. And there's so much emotional turmoil, almost these schizophrenic images of people screaming and having these different facial reactions, right? Their sense of control is quickly slipping away from them. And as we learned that the intuitive frame before COVID-19 is they struggled with these. So it's going to continue to be a struggle and shape their unconscious perceptions. We recommend that here, how can we show them that the struggle is real, right? We have to acknowledge the pressure that they're feeling today, that they can accept the real you, be it the good, the bad, the struggle, the imperfections, and relieve the pressure that they have right now to almost present this image of perfection, that they're not being impacted by COVID-19, that they're not being vulnerable and voicing that this is impacting their mental health as well. And before we close this out as well, and how is this going to impact them long term? Karush had found some speculations for how now post COVID-19 this is going to change the future for this generation of health and wellness.
Thanks, Jess. So I think interestingly, looking at the early signals that have emerged in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, I think we would hypothesize that in fact the COVID-19 crisis, I mean, despite the fact that received discourse says that things have been turned on their head, the world has been turned upside down, and it certainly feels like that because it's a radical rupture to the way we and Gen Z lead their lives. In fact, the crisis we could hypothesize that the crisis has in fact just accelerated underlying trends. So, for instance, we see like the shift towards gaming platforms as sites of connection and kind of social engagement has been accelerated by COVID. So very recently, the rapper Travis Scott performed in the Fortnite universe. Not being a Fortnite player myself, I was nonetheless impressed by the rendering of the performance and the creativity that went into it. I'm not sure what it's like in America, but in the UK, everyone has now taken up long distance running and cycling in the age of COVID. And many people are using the Zwift platform, which is a platform you can use indoors to simulate either running or cycling in a chosen destination. So you can run the London Marathon virtually, regardless of the fact that the real thing has been postponed till next year. I think we're also seeing an acceleration towards telemedicine and personalized health trends. So Vital is a startup that provides personalized vitamin capsules and medicines to your door, kind of like a seamless process. And then finally, recently we have seen a new documentary on Netflix called Have a Good Trip, which indicates the normalization of psychedelics and at the very least alternative medicines in the treatment of kind of mental health problems, but just generally as a method for improving mood or productivity. The kind of growing interest in psychedelics suggests a instinct or a desire to reconnect with yourself or perhaps belief and concepts beyond the self. So in all of these kind of speculations, we see indications of an emerging future that I think are just being brought a bit closer on our horizon by the COVID-19 crisis.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So when we think then about the whole picture of what's happening pre and during COVID, and as Karush just brought up the future as well, is pre-COVID we found that the traditional health and wellness model, right, is being replaced, has been replaced by Generation Z. It's not just about purely aesthetics for them at all. It's more the mental, right? The mental health is how they're defining it. And the reliance on external motivators has now shifted to that internal motivation as how they can achieve that overall holistic sense of well-being. And then finally for them, how connection and control are so important in communicating wellness. So when we think claims, packaging cues, right? Even new product innovations, how can we communicate connection and control so that it's intuitive and resonates with the needs of Generation Z? Now, during COVID, there's so much opportunity for how to help this generation in how they're defining health and wellness, to exercise control, because as we just shared out, they feel completely out of control right now, and how this could help them and connect them to brands as well during this time. And then finally, loneliness is so potent for for Generation Z right now, and it is almost a defining feature of them as it relates to COVID-19. This is only intensifying for them, and I'm incredibly interested to see how data is going to shift and change as stay-at-home orders are prolonged, or we have them and then they go away and then they come back during the waves. And then finally, before we open it up to the Q&A, is we're hypothesizing, and we don't have any answer for this, but we're wondering if COVID-19 is going to have a role to play in a larger shift for Generation Z. Are we going to see this generation going back to external motivators, which is more of a traditional way that we've seen in other cohorts as it relates to health and wellness, because now society is influencing our decisions right now. So depending on how long the COVID-19 behaviors last, are we going to see a tension now with Gen Z? Because before, 10 months ago, they were really squarely in internal motivators, that they made the decisions that were best from them. They were guided by their intuition, that they were doing they were sort of rebelling against traditional ways of defining health and wellness. But will this change now because of the influence of society making decisions for them as well? And time will tell on what the future will hold for that. All right, so I'm going to put our email addresses up here as we close out in our last few minutes of the webinar. I'm just going to scroll up a bit. Thanks for the questions and comments. So Nancy asks, is Gen Z more internally motivated? How does that align or not align with celebrity culture and influencers? This is interesting. Still more important, but more curated. This is a really great question, and there's been some writing done on celebrity culture with Gen Z being more important, being very important for this generation as well. My colleague Malcolm shared with me that an interesting statistic that over 50% of them aspire to become YouTube stars or influencers. That is a significant part of the cohort. And so we do see this continuing to be important for them. But then I wonder what the role of authenticity is for Gen Z influencers. Krush, do you guys have any data on celebrity culture for Gen Z, or any speculations?
Yeah, I think Nancy's question is an interesting one, and I'm going to assume that her second comment was maybe a second part to that question, where she asks whether this sense of being alone in a crowd is perhaps an eternal adolescent sentiment, or whether it's particular to Gen Z. And I think I'd agree with her that to some extent that period of growth involves some introspection and loneliness, perhaps, and kind of like looking inwards a bit. However, I think it's interesting to compare what that looking inwards kind of looks like for Gen Z compared to perhaps millennials. So if you look at some of the icons of millennial culture, such as Lena Dunham, the process of introspection is kind of stuck. There's this kind of rumination and this kind of feeling that you're not headed anywhere and you don't know who you are and how you fit in. I don't think we see that kind of internal struggle so much with Gen Z, and that might be due to simple material pressures to act and react in their life situations. I think there's always going to be, for each generation, a search inwards as well as a kind of connectivity to the outside world. It's just kind of what kind of shape that takes.
Mm-hmm. And then Georgia's question is also, I want to focus primarily on the part of your question where, what are some insights that educators could take to consider when designing and delivering courses at universities as we start to move online? This question is interesting as well, because it also impacts all of us as we think webinars and things going virtual and digital meetings. and really starting to be effective in an entirely new platform as well. And I do think for that, video is so important, right? Even the micro expressions that we share with people. And that's what on this, even here, that you as an audience can't see me. And I wonder too, if there's a way to embed ways that people can more intuitively connect in the delivering valuable information digitally, and taking cues from TikTok and other social media platforms. Kurush, have you guys seen anything that anyone interestingly is doing as it relates to education?
Yeah, actually, there was some people might have noticed on Twitter, there was a debate recently about ed tech, and essentially it was an educator pointing out that, in fact, teaching a child online poses kind of like safety hazard or risk if they're in potentially abusive or non-welcoming homes. And in fact, privacy and the ability for the child to connect with educators or therapists in a safe space needs to be resolved in the age of COVID. So I think the interrelation between physical location and the digital platform really matters. I don't think we're solely online when we're connecting online. There's a tension there that needs resolving and working through.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I did see that too on Twitter. And then Carissa, thank you for your question, is how does the reality of what they can control and their loss of control match with that they control their response? So this is a good question, because they do feel empowered now to control themselves and control the images that they're portraying online as well, or even their resiliency when it comes to their mental health and wellness. And they're really fighting against everything that is happening to them right now. They're feeling very helpless, right? When we think the pandemic or even global warming, the collapse of our economy as well, politicalization of everything. And then when we put COVID on top of that, this is really crushing them, to use a metaphor as well, which is why I've gained a lot of empathy for this generation as we look at the data that's being presented to us, because there were so many tensions and the loss of control in their lives before COVID as well. And as Karusha mentioned, it is just magnifying and amplifying that and speeding this up. And I'm wondering how this cohort could persevere through this as well, and the role of brand communication in this to support them, to be relevant for them.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think to some extent the tension is true, and kind of overcoming that tension is going to be a challenge for a parent, not to mention a kind of brand, but brands perhaps have a role in encouraging local actions and looking to facilitate action in personal ecosystems relating to the environment or spiritual belief. I think that, for instance, if you look at emerging fitness trends, perhaps meeting small incremental goals could be enough for now for people to feel like they are staying kind of above water in a time of crisis.
And that's a perfect metaphor to end this webinar, Kurush, because we found in some of our data that this generation in COVID-19, they do feel like there is a hurricane or a tsunami that is threatening them, and they do feel underwater. So it's a very perfect, apt metaphor. If anyone has any questions, our email addresses are here. Please reach out. We're going to be following up with the presentation and the videos of this generation, and we look forward to hearing from you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you.